This is the Widow Podcast, and I am Karen Sutton, the Widow Coach. I'll be supporting you through the loss of your life partner so you can find a more positive way through your grief. I want to give you hope after loss and to know that when you are ready, you can create a meaningful life for yourself with the help of me, Karen Sutton, and the Widow Podcast. Hello and welcome back. Today I have the lovely, amazing, super brilliant Emily Bingham here today. If you don't know Emily, you should know Emily. She is fantastic and all over social media platforms with incredible reels and posts and videos. And I mean, I think you write beautifully, Emily. I think you are clearly very creative in how you reach people with your message. So welcome to the podcast. Thank you for coming.
I am so excited to be here, Karen, and I feel the same about you. I love your energy. I love the way that you share, and I love this podcast that you're doing. So thanks for having me on.
Oh, bless you. Thank you. And thank you so much for being here. You're doing amazing things. You really are doing amazing things in the world of grief. I know, obviously, you're over in America and you have so much support going on. I think like every 5 minutes you're coming up with another program. You're so creative. You're so out there and you know, in supporting people through all aspects of widowhood, from the early days right the way through to dating and beyond. I think you're supporting people now in creating their own businesses and their own support networks, aren't you?
Yeah, I love it. It's so fun. Yes, one thing I love about this work as a grief coach is that my programs get to evolve as I do, and my community gets to come along for the ride. And I think that's what makes this journey just so unique. I love it.
It is so unique. So let's start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about your husband, Ian.
All right. So this is a long story, so I will try to keep it succinct. But I met my husband, Ian, in college. We were 18 years old, fell madly in love, you know, just this storybook romance, and dated through college, took a little break, and then as we were on a break, we discovered that he was diagnosed with uveal melanoma. Now, at the time, we both were like, okay, what is this? We're going to fight it. We're going to be fine, thinking that we're totally invincible. So ironically, his cancer diagnosis brought us back together because I think almost at a subconscious level, it's like, okay, bad things can happen. Let it really crystallize like what's important in life. We were kind of on our own paths, exploring our career. And I think that his diagnosis is what kind of brought us back together. And so we got back together, you know, did some different medical visits. But we really just kind of felt that the cancer was behind us. He did some radiation. And then we got married. We started a young family, you know, did all of the things. And then, in 2017, we found out that his cancer metastasized. And this was at a time where we had already had our first daughter, and I was pregnant with my second son. And so that kind of began the beginning of my grief journey right there. I didn't know it at the time, but that was when I entered into anticipatory grief, which was just you're already kind of grieving the life that you had prior to your person's diagnosis, that sense of normalcy, being able to be this young family together. We were already grieving that then. And then I was also anticipating Ian's death and all of the emotions that come up with having to navigate that. So Ian fought about 15 months and then he passed away in March of 2019. And since then, it's been an entirely new life. You know, I navigated early grief by finding my coping outlet in exercise, by also connecting with other widows, by finding meaning and purpose really early on in sharing my story and hearing from others that it was really supporting them. And that's kind of what launched what my movement is today around my company, moveTHRU. But my loss has just changed me at so many different levels. It's been really painful. It's been really hard. And there's no, getting past that. The growth and the goodness that has come from this experience doesn't minimize the tragedy, all of it. And I think one thing that I really pride myself on and try to encourage others to do too is that like living after a loss is so much about holding that duality that exists in life, yet we fail to see it as a society. And what I mean by that is that the human experience is full of pain and suffering, just as much as joy and love and gratitude. And I believe that the way that we learn to not just survive a loss, but to thrive is by embracing those parts.
Yeah, I think you're so right. You know, it's a lived experience, isn't it? And you can't have one without the other. And yeah, it'd be great if we could all be happy all the time and not experience pain and heartache. But if we weren't going to experience those things, we wouldn't experience the love and the joy that does coexist, that, you know, they run alongside each other, and making space for both of those things is tough, because I think we're kind of taught it's one or the other, and that's how it works. And I think grief teaches us a lot in that respect. Do you think you had your anticipatory grief that you talked about there when you knew Ian's illness was terminal? Do you think that prepares you for the moment that Ian died, that, you know, he left his body in the physical sense, and then you had to continue? Do you feel that there's a preparation in that?
Yes and no. And it's hard right now, I think, to take myself from my own experience and from what I've seen with others, and what I will say is that this is my experience and it's not the same as everyone else's, right? So for me, what happened in terms of the anticipatory grief leading up is, I feel like it might have taken some of the edge of the shock off a little bit. I was also able to see the passing as I would say less traumatic, because I was kind of eased into it. I was able to say goodbye. But what I have recognized in my healing now, being almost 4 years out, is that I actually dissociated during that time. And that's a trauma response. And it was during the time of hospice where this really happened, when the doctors were like, your husband's actually dying. And what was interesting in my experience is that prior to that, I didn't have one doctor actually say that Ian was dying. It was so focused on hope, we're going to survive, we're going to beat this, right? And it wasn't until a month before his actual death where someone was like, your husband has cancer everywhere and he's dying. Like, the next step is focusing on, you know, quality of life and comfort. So, and that's when we entered into hospice. So I just feel like it's kind of a mixed bag. Like, I feel like at the time it felt like it was easier to accept because I dissociated and I was so disconnected from the reality that I was living in. And that was my body's way of trying to protect me from the pain. Right. And even I would say even the 6 months after, I was still in this degree of like shock and numbness to my reality. So, I think, like I said, it gave me some pieces of peace and closure, but I've also really had to work on going back to that month of hospice and that early grief and the dying experience to really process the pain of that time and what that experience really meant to me.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I know you did David Kessler's Grief Educators program at the same time as me, which was brilliant. But he talks about the river of grief, which I love. And, you know, I remember he said, you know, some people are thrown into the middle of the river with a sudden loss. You know, you find yourself catapulted from dry land into the middle of this river that's running wild. Other people walk into the river. You know, it's more expected. But ultimately, we all end up in the middle of this river, not knowing what the hell's going on, how we navigate it, you know, and get through, I suppose, the turbulent waters. So, I guess within the anticipatory grief, that ability to step into the river is there. But however, you still end up in it and you've still got to deal with the aftermath.
Yes, I love that analogy. And I think that's exactly it. Like, I feel like at the time I was like, oh, I'm so prepared for this. But then, your person passes away, and then there's still all of this shock and disorientation on the other side, because your life is completely new and foreign now. So, and just that like acceptance of death is just, that's like a lifelong journey, I believe. So you find yourself in that current anyways. So that's a perfect analogy. And I think it's so different for everyone.
And that, I think, is the important thing with all of this, isn't it? That we all do this differently. All our experiences are different. All of our situations are different. All of our support systems are different. And there's no right or wrong way. It's just trying to find your way. Now, obviously, since Ian's died, like you say, you've founded your company, moveTHRU, and you've created a great support structure there, virtually and in person, because you do your retreats now. And in that, in the growing of what you do and creating an awareness that you're out there, you are so open, you are so vulnerable in what you share on social media. And some of the things that you share are pictures of Ian and some videos of Ian whilst he's ill, some whilst he's, clearly very ill and close to the end. Was that a difficult decision to make, to share that part of your life? Because it's one thing talking about it, isn't it? But it's another thing sharing it. And I think it's incredibly brave. So how did you come to that decision? Was it difficult for you?
Well, for most anything that I share on social media, it's like, I think early on, it was me bleeding onto the pages of social media. It was literally me and my raw emotion, just like getting it out there. And I didn't even really know what I was doing in the beginning. And I think part of that was, I don't even believe I made a conscious choice in the beginning to start to share those images. For me, I was like, I need somebody else to witness what I am going through, to see what it is to witness your loved one dying and to watch their body fade in from this like strong man to this like human shell. And what does that look like? What does it feel like? I felt so alone in that experience, I think. And I was like, I just need somebody else out there to understand like a fraction of what I'm going through. And so that's when I began to put those images out there. As I kind of became more intentional with my pieces of my story that I was sharing, I consciously chose, and I did. I started to get some pushback, even from Ian's friends and family, and from strangers on the internet. Well, would your husband want those pictures to be out there? Would would he want that? And I had to sit with that for a bit. And I was like, I honestly, I don't know. I think if I were to be able to have a conversation with Ian right now, and he were to hear me say, like, I needed that piece of my experience witnessed for myself, and knowing that I needed that witnessed for myself, I also know that others needed that witness too, right? It's like, because on the flip side, I've also had people reach out and say, thank you for sharing that. It is so hard and awful to go through that experience alone. So if Ian was alive and I was able to explain that to him, I think he'd be like, hell yeah. And as I've thought about it some more, it's like, I can say my husband died. How many times before your person's death, right? Were you like, you'd hear of someone dying and it's like, oh, that's so sad. That's so sad. And it's pretty easy to just move along with your day. But once you see the image, it's like, whoa, it stops you in your tracks. There's a visceral reaction to that where you're forced to kind of witness death, acknowledge it. It's here. It's a part of our life. And it's not just, the stranger down the street, but we see our own mortality. We see our own children or our own loved ones dying too. And so the reason why there's such an aversion to this, and why people on the internet, have said, oh my gosh, like freak out about these images, is because it's giving them a taste of their own mortality, and nobody wants to look at that. We are so in denial of death as a society. So, yes, I did it originally to be witnessed in my own experience. Now it's to bring an awareness around death, to also release the stigma, the fear, even the shame, because when you feel alone in a situation like that, you can internalize it and that creates a sense of shame. So it's to release all of that and to acknowledge an experience that's so universal and so sacred, yet we're so afraid of it, to talk about it and acknowledge it as a society.
You're so right. It is very scary and people don't want to talk about it. It's hard facing the thought of your own mortality, or even, somebody that you love that's close to you, and seeing that is difficult for sure. But you're right. There's a lot of people out there that are going through that feel very alone in it. And that's what you're trying to do, is reach those people, right? And help them feel less alone and less isolated, and to let them know that you're there, and that there are people out there that get it, because it's not shared, it's not talked about enough.
Right. And it can feel really victimizing when you feel alone in it, and when you create a story around it like this. And, to a degree, it's like a bad thing did happen to all of us. Nobody wants to lose someone we love. But if we can start to reframe the story and recognize that death is a natural passing, and yes, of course, we never want to lose someone before we expected them to. We want them to be with us forever. But if we can start to release the story and acknowledge it as like, this is something that happens to all of us, we can kind of break down those walls of victimhood to allow us to move forward.
So did you and Ian talk about the after, whilst he was still alive, but knew that he was going to die? Did you discuss what he wanted for you and the children, or what you wanted? What discussions did you have around that?
Zero. Like, I wish that we had more. And this is because we were in such denial of his death. Again, another reason why it's like, it's not something to be feared. It is something to be discussed, because I do wish that I had had those conversations with Ian. I did try to bring up the conversations a couple of times. And for Ian, he just was not able to acknowledge it. And I don't fault him for it. I have been angry with him, and I've worked through a lot of that anger, because I do believe that grief, the experience of loss, is a shared journey. It's like, but in our experience, we did focus only on the dying. It wasn't about the people who he was leaving behind. It was about Ian. And that's fine. We didn't know any better. I don't hold any grudges, but I do, if I could rewrite that story and share with others, it's like, have the hard conversations. We're not in that much control. We can't predict the outcome as much as the doctors think that you can, as much as the medical studies, whatever. It's like, this is a possibility for all of us. And to have those conversations about life after, even if you aren't sick, I think is such an important conversation to be had.
Yeah, so right. And, I speak to so many people, and so must you, that have a similar story, that, they knew their person was going to die, but the conversations were just too hard, too difficult to bring up, to start, to have. And that's okay, right? Because we're all just doing our best, and you have to go with what feels right at the time. And that was obviously right for you guys. There's no right or wrong. It's so difficult. And you kind of touched on there how little we understand about grief and death, and what little knowledge and understanding we have about it as a society. We do live in a grief illiterate society. But why? What's going on? Like, why are we living in this when it's the only certainty that we all have in life? Why are we not more open about it and more understanding of it?
Right. Well, and I just listened to a podcast with Megan Devine, and it was really interesting. She was explaining the reason that we kind of just tend to just turn a blind eye has a historical context, in that it was during one of the wars, maybe World War I, where everyone was dying all around. Everyone was dying, and the government kind of said, "All right, keep calm, carry on." Like, you can turn a blind eye because we still need to fight the war. We still need, it was like this sense of like patriotism and like, let's go. We don't have time for grief. We don't have time for loss. And how, this has been ingrained in our society at such a for many centuries ago, right? So it makes sense. Yeah.
It does, doesn't it? I think when you go back and that's passed down, that's handed through, isn't it? But like, how do we change that? Because I just think it's so hard, isn't it? And I think obviously, we're trying to in our small way in the world. And I think there's a lot of people out there now. I do think there's a lot more out there talking about grief and loss and trying to normalize it and offer that support. But I mean, we find it so hard. We find it so hard to access our feelings and our emotions and work with them. We spend a lot of our time trying to fight them, don't we? And like you say, maybe it is that keep calm, carry on, stiff upper lip. We've got this, just time heals all wounds, just keep going. It'll all be all right. But it's just, I don't think, I mean, yes, time heals, a graze on the skin or a broken bone for sure. But I think wounds of the heart, that they need working through, I think, but we just seem so ill-equipped to do that, don't we?
Yeah, I talk about this a lot in all of my programs and in my content. And it goes back to, yes, the societal conditioning that we have around hardship and emotions, the fact that we even label our emotions as bad or good when they are all valid, right? They all deserve reverence. So I think when you find yourself thrown into the depths of grief and you're feeling a lot of these quote unquote bad emotions, it leaves room for a lot of judgment and criticism and making the whole experience, again, quote unquote wrong, when grief is such a part, it's part of the human experience. It's part of life. We're all going to lose at some point. So a lot of the work that I do is, helping people bring the awareness that they have been conditioned, whether it's by society, religion, culture, even by their upbringing. If were emotions allowed in your household, were you told to suck it up and do the stiff upper lip, right? Because it's different for everyone. And it really, David Kessler, one of my favorite lines was like, we tend to have emotions about our emotions. We start to feel anxious if an emotion feels too consuming, or we might feel shame for being too angry. We might feel guilty for feeling joy in grief. And what that does is they inhibit us from feeling those core emotions, which are the ones where we need to feel in order to heal, right? We need to process, we need to be with, like you said, in order to integrate them, in order to integrate this entire experience into our lives.
So true. So true. Who taught you to do those things? How did you figure out to do that for yourself in your grief before you went down this path?
Oh my gosh, that's a really good question. So my journey was very much about getting curious. Like it was about exercise, finding coping skills, because I wasn't sad. I was so angry. And it only exacerbated it because being a solo mom to a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, I just could not. It was so much. So I had to find a coping outlet for that big energy, for that big emotion. And then once I could move that energy through, I was in a more connected, calm state of being. But then the rest of this was really self-taught for me. I dove into podcasts, which is why I love that you have one. I listened to like every podcast on grief, on healing. I read every widow memoir, all the self-help books, and what I was just telling you about inhibitory emotions. That is from the book It's Not Always Depression by Hilary Jacobs Handel. And she's talking about, it's called the change triangle. And it's a tool to feeling your emotions. I listened to Mark Groves, his podcast, which was primarily on relationships, but I just did this deep dive into healing and grief and loss. And I read books about like The Choice by Dr. Edith Eger and her story of surviving the Holocaust and how, to take back power when life leaves you feeling powerless. And I just kind of created this, I don't know, just my own little individualized healing plan for myself. And then as I started my business, I also learned more through my grief educator certification and just kept gathering all of these tools that worked for me, and now I share them with my clients. So it's kind of a unique blend.
I love that. I have to say, The Choice by Edith Eger, I just think is just such a brilliant book. That woman just blows me away, honestly. She's incredible, absolutely incredible. And it does show us the choices that we have, doesn't it? And I'm so passionate about this in what I do, because I think it's very easy for us to say, I had no choice. It's like, but you had choices, and you made good choices, and you're making choices every day, and empower yourself with that and see that. And it sounds very much like myself, actually. I, in my curiosity around my grief, I did do a lot of grief research, but I got a bit griefed out. And I kind of got to a point where it's like, I can't read about any more grief. Like it's too heavy. And which is where I found the world of personal development and great people, great podcasts and stuff. And like you, I kind of immersed myself in that, in the books. And I feel like that taught me so much, which I love doing now, because obviously I educate about grief like you do, but there's so many life skills, aren't there, that come into your healing process that you get to take forward with you and utilize. That they're not just pertinent to grief, are they? They're pertinent to life. And and this is where I think we're kind of getting it a bit wrong. We're not taught these life skills. We're not taught how to be resilient, how to empower ourselves, to recognize the choices that we're making and find our way through hardships and tragedies. Because, when you read things like The Choice, you go, oh my God, people get through so much. We are wired to adapt. We are capable of adapting. And that's powerful, I think. I think that's so really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think what this experience has taught me is like, your life is so uncertain. Like, we do not control as much as we think that we do. And the only thing that we can control is how we respond. And so the way that we become more resilient and we increase our ability to weather any storm is by doubling down on the investments that we make in ourselves, in the human that we're becoming, and being able to trust that whatever comes our way, we're going to be able to walk ourselves through it. And to me, that's like power. And that's not just in grief, that's in life, because this isn't going to be the last hardship that we face.
No, that's it. And why though? I found it really hard. I made a big investment in myself, in my journey. I got myself a coach, and I was like, what am I doing? I don't understand. Best thing I ever did, though. Hands down, best thing I ever did. It helped me with everything, mindset, health, fitness, strength, like my reactions, my responses, my awareness of everything around me and the world around me. But it's hard to do that, isn't it? Because we don't invest in ourselves. We just keep going. And especially, as a wife and a mum, or, work, you've got a job, a career, you're giving. And we don't take that time out for us. And I think that's one of the biggest messages I tend to have is take that investment, make it in you, and it will pave the way forward in such a positive way.
Right. And I think it's hard for people to understand unless they actually put 2 feet in and make the investment and see the change. And I understand why people don't, because there's a lot of fear. There's uncertainty. When you make an investment, right, you're accepting a degree of risk because the outcome is unknown. And that's what triggers fear in any situation. Because I remember when I made my first investment in my coach too, and I started coaching in a different way. I started coaching around trying to bring my business to life, and I still have a business mentor. But what you realize is that the lessons that you learn in navigating business are the same lessons that I'm learning to navigate my relationship, that are the same in navigating grief, and the same in life. There's just so many different parallels. And that's why, I am never going to stop investing in myself, because I am my safest asset. And I think there's an initiation when anyone first makes that first investment, that's an initiation in themselves, because they're saying, I am worthy. I am worthy of this. I am capable. I believe that change is possible. And the reason when people don't is because they don't believe. And so something I've been working on is and why I think it's really powerful to be vulnerable in content and to share that, like, yeah, I still have grief days. Like, I still struggle with this, is to open up about that and be like, I'm human too. There's nothing different than me. There's nothing that separates me apart from you. Right? Like, at a very essential human level, we have like, and yes, there's privilege. There's different things that can set us up to be able to access safety and to take these risks. But at a very just like human foundation, it's like, it's a choice. It's walking with the fear and putting 2 feet in and committing to that change and then seeing what happens.
And what I think is lovely about it, and like you, I get it's hard to do that, especially when you've lost your person, your life partner, the the person you would make those choices with, that would kind of validates that for you. But it then, where that takes you, it reassures you that the choices that you're making are good ones, that you are capable of making decisions that are powerful and are going to have such a beneficial impact on you and your life. But you're right, you've got to take that leap of faith, haven't you, in the first place to see that. So now, you've kind of told us that you have met your new man, David. Is that right? Is that right? Isn't it? He looks lovely. He looks really lovely. Do you think Ian would have liked David and David would have liked Ian?
I think that they would have liked each other. I think they're so different, like so different.
Are they?
Yeah, absolutely. I almost feel like I've switched roles in a way. Like David is like who I was in my relationship with Ian, and I am like Ian in my relationship with David. Like, it's just, the dynamics are so incredibly different. What I need and what I desire in a partner has completely changed. Just really what I value now is so incredibly different than what it was when I met Ian as an 18-year-old college freshman, So while there are some commonalities, I would say it's just an entirely different relationship. And I've really, really had to learn to let go of the comparisons. I mean, I can love the comparisons, normalize them, acknowledge them, right? Because they're there and we're human. And at the same time, it's like challenge them and really challenge the way that love feels. Like, love feels so different to me now. And something I'm working on just personally is like my ability to love so openly and to give myself, freely to somebody. That's been a loss. That's been another loss, is that I don't feel like I'm able to do that yet. I'm working on it and I know that as I go deeper into my grief, I will be able to expand my capacity to love again. But that's a big wound. And that's actually kind of what led to my breakup with David, because I didn't trust, I made it, instead of making the resistance that I was feeling and the fear that I was feeling about me, I put it on him. And because I didn't trust myself. I was like, well, if I'm not feeling exactly the same way that I did when I was an 18-year-old, then this must be wrong. He must not be the right guy. And so we took a break and I really did a lot of work on myself. I spent a lot of time alone. I didn't date anyone else. I just did therapy and really dove into my grief. And I started to realize, like, it's just me. It's just me who's holding myself back. And it's funny. Grief is so freaking sneaky. And this experience of loss is so sneaky because these walls that are built around our heart to protect us now are so subconscious. And so you really have to be doing this deep inner work, I feel, to be understanding like why you're showing up the way that you are in relationships.
I love that, because I think it's a great skill to have in life, is to adopt that curiosity in everything that goes on for us, and release the judgment, release the criticism, and get curious, like, what's going on? Why am I feeling this? What's triggering this response in me? What's happened? And like, if you hadn't have done that work, it's like probably likely that you and David wouldn't have reconnected. And he's clearly very special, very patient, and very in love with you, which is beautiful. But it's hard. It is hard. And this is the thing about grief. It is sneaky. You work your way through one layer of it, and then something else happens in your life. And then there's another layer of it. And whether that's with you and your relationships, or with children and something that's going on in their lives, or something with finances, I don't know. There's so many aspects that the loss kind of sneaks into, and they pop up and they bite you on the bum, and you're like, oh God, that's the grief thing again, isn't it? Like, if you go, okay, let's go back, rewind.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's dive into that and see what's going on. But it's hard to do that, I think, sometimes, to be that honest with yourself and that curious, and to sit with the discomfort of those things and acknowledge that actually it's you, and you've got to work through something else. But it's worth it. It's worth it.
It's so empowering. And I think of couples, because I started learning about consciousness through the concept of conscious relationship, but how much resistance and conflict we run into in relationship, not just with your romantic partners, but with your family members, with your friends, colleagues, because we aren't consciously aware of why we're showing up the way that we are. And so I think in the rupture of grief, there is an invitation to really go deep and to meet yourself at your essence, beyond these ego roles that we've been conditioned to show up as, and to really, really get curious about all of that subconscious programming that's just like buried, and to unearth that, and to see how it's how we're ultimately programmed, right? Like how it's driving our lives. There's a quote by Carl Jung where he says, until you make the unconscious conscious, you live your life and you call it fate. And another way of thinking about it too, Glennon Doyle, she says, our brains are like computers, and the beliefs, the feelings, the way that we show up in life is our programming. And it's all been informed by, right, like religion, society. And it's just fascinating. And I'm getting more into that now, like with my work too, in terms of like, how do I want to live my life? And understanding what parts of myself are holding me back, and what parts do I want to let go of? What parts do I want to embrace? What areas do I want to heal? And it's pretty fascinating, empowering stuff. So
it is fascinating, because we're so unaware of our belief systems, aren't we? And how we are programmed, and where even has that come from? And
right.
Why do we have those beliefs? Like, where did that come from? Is that even my belief, or is that something I've inherited from somebody else that I've seen on the telly, or my mum's told me, or a friend's kind of going with? And actually, when we sit down and question these things, you go, I'm not sure, actually. I'm not sure that's for me. And what I love, and I think you're going to agree with me here, is the power of community, because I know you've got a great community, and I have my communities, with my program, my membership, and the power of community and bringing people together and having discussions and talking about belief systems and judgments and all of that kind of good stuff. Like, when one person says something, it invites you to explore that within yourself, and you have these like aha moments, don't you? Where you go, oh yeah, actually that I kind of resonate with that. I think I'm the same. And that's amazing, isn't it? And I think I truly believe in finding a community of people that are going through something similar, because it blows me away. It blows me away that what people can discover and work through in those environments. We can't do it on our own, can we?
Yeah. And like, that's honestly why I love group coaching more than one-to-one, because I think there's so much power in the group. Like, I can give you all of the tools and, context from my story, right? But when you have 10 other widows in the room from different backgrounds, from different upbringings, right? Like, they're going to all have a different experience, and grief is so incredibly unique, but we all know, the one universal need of grievers is for that grief to be witnessed. And so you're not only having that space to come and share without judgment, without expectation, where that grief isn't going to get fixed, but it's going to be held. And yeah, I think that each person's unique experience has the potential to not only just normalize and validate something that you're going through, but to unlock like another key, another layer that's going to really shift things for you and give you that invitation to get curious about it for yourself, like you said. And like looking at these things isn't always pretty. It's really scary to like lift up the hood and see what's operating beneath the surface. And I think when you do that in community too and realize, oh my gosh, she just went there, it kind of gives you the power to do it for yourself. It helps you access that courage. And also know that like if she survived it, then I can too. Like I love the power of community. And I've just seen people flourish by coming together and moving through this experience with a close-knit family, essentially, who's also going through it too. I think we connect to each other through the highs of life, but man, going through some of the deepest lows, like it's just like a visceral connection. And I just will share one story with you. Like moveTHRU started by me teaching a spin class. I used to be a spin instructor. And so I literally like gathered a group of people who were going through grief. We went into the spin studio, turned off the lights. I'd play some music. We didn't even have to talk. But what the client said after being in that spin room for 45 minutes, and I kind of like guided them through some things to think about, is just by being on the bike together, we could feel that unity. We could feel that connection because we all knew at that deep visceral level, like what it is like to lose. And I thought that was really powerful.
It is holding that space for people, isn't it? In whatever way that they need, where they feel seen and heard. And that is one of our biggest needs, isn't it, in all of it, that people struggle to give us because we don't know how to be around grief. And that's the sadness of it. But, you know, being part of these communities, I think, is so healing, so healing. You've done so much, Emily. You've achieved so much in your journey, personally, professionally. What do you think has been your biggest learning through all of this that you treasure almost, that you take forward with you through having lost Ian and going through that grief?
I think one of the biggest takeaways, or the one that feels like really alive for me right now, because they continue to change. I mean, I could say early on, it was like appreciation for life, you know, seeing new possibilities for myself, kind of more of like that post-traumatic growth stuff that was really like lighting me up. But now I'm noticing that like, I believe that life is really made in the void. The growth is also in the void. But what happens all too often is we're in it, we're doing the things, we're doing the work, we're doing the motherhood or business, whatever. And we set a goal for ourselves. And we get so set on this goal, on this next milestone that we want to reach, whether it's, you know, finding a new partner, whether it's enrolling clients in a program. And we get so fixated on that we just miss what's happening in the in-between. And that's where most of our life is. Because then what happens is you reach the milestone and you're like, okay, what's next? And if you don't even take a second to just celebrate and look back at, you know, everything that you've walked yourself, everything that you've accomplished, and really to like celebrate it, to be grateful for it, then it just minimizes everything that you've just done. And we end up living a life full of lack. Like it's never enough. We're never full. We're never whole. And so I've really been embracing this idea of like 1 foot in gratitude, 1 foot in desire. You know, like we can always be desiring more for ourselves, wanting more out of life. But like if you don't have that gratitude piece, it's like, what is it all about? And that's why I say like the void. And I want to bring it back to grief really quick, because I think there's so much that you lose after your person dies. And that loss touches everything, like not just your person, but all of the secondary losses that come with it. And what I see is like, we get so fixated on like, I want to get back to normal. I just want my life back. I just want to reach that end goal. You know, and feel normal again, be better, whatever it is. Like, I just want to rebuild my life, find a new partner. And we create so much more suffering for ourselves. It's like bringing that timeline a little bit closer. You're already doing it, being back in the now, looking at all of the evidence that is already there to show you that like, you're okay. Maybe you're not thriving yet, but I think we thrive in releasing this expectation on ourselves and just learning to embrace who we are and where we are in this moment.
Such a powerful message, because I think we're all guilty of that. I know I certainly am, that kind of always working towards something, thinking that it's going to be better when you get to a point in time, whatever it is you're working towards. But actually, it's not the destination, it's the journey, right?
It is.
And we miss it. We do miss it. And that's hard. And I get sometimes, when we are grieving, we don't want to be on the journey. We want to get to the destination because actually this journey is too hard, too tough. But trying to find and focus on what is still good whilst you're on your journey of heartache and healing. And I think that's a lesson that we all sometimes have to think about, to focus on, to give time to, isn't it? It's just, even when things are so incredibly painful and hard, like what is still good, just what around you. And that might just be a text message from somebody, your favorite coffee from a coffee shop that gives you some comfort, or,
right.
A TV program, or birds singing in the garden. They don't have to be big things, but just those little moments where you go, that's nice. That's nice,
Absolutely.
It's, we have to look a little bit harder sometimes to see it, but I think it's there. And if we can do that, that grows and just keeps us focused in the present moment and dealing with what we've got in that, because that is all we've got, isn't it? Like the past is done and the future isn't here yet. So yeah, I think that's a really lovely message. Thank you for sharing that, Emily.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's been such a lovely conversation. I could talk to you for so long, but I know you've got to go for a run because you're training for a marathon, which is just amazing. I can't imagine it. I could probably manage, I don't know, 10K, but anything beyond that, I think I would die.
Well, and it's been fun because I feel like the marathon's been like a fun analogy for me to play with in grief too. Like I'm using all these mantras like, the discomfort is only temporary, but the growth on the other side is permanent. And how do I find comfort in the discomfort? And I think there's a lot of analogies there with grief. And again, like if I'm only focusing on this finish line of running 26, whatever miles it is, like that's so overwhelming. And so it's like, okay, let go of the end goal, release my attachment to the outcome, and just, again, enjoy the journey, enjoy the transformation that my body is going through, not making the suffering and the pain wrong. It's part of the process. It's part of how we transform and grow. And like, there's just so many different analogies that you can take from life to support yourself through any type of hardship.
I love that. It's so true. So where can people find you before you go, Emily? Like what are you offering? What's out there at the moment? And what's the best way to reach out to you and what you do? Because I know you've got so much on offer. You probably haven't got time to go through it all, but how can people find out?
I think I probably have too much. No, I am active on Instagram and TikTok, so you can find me there. I also have a free Facebook community for grief. It's called moveTHRU. And then I just launched my newest offer, which is my moveTHRU membership, which really is my way of trying to give people a more flexible, accessible option to this work to reduce the fear of investing in themselves and to just plug into a community where they can have their grief witnessed, they can connect with other widows, they can learn coping skills and not have to navigate this alone. And they can cancel at any time if it doesn't feel aligned for them. So that will be the plug for my latest program, because yes, there are some others, but moveTHRUgrief.com, and that's about it.
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll put all the links in the show notes. So, people can have a look there. But just also moveTHRU is THRU, isn't it? moveTHRU, THRU. Yes. And you'll find Emily there. Emily, thank you so much. Thank you for coming and sharing your heart and being open. It's been so lovely talking to you. And hopefully we'll do it again sometime in the future.
Yes, I would love that, Karen. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to the Widow podcast with me, Karen Sutton. If you would like to be part of a supportive community of people who understand your grief, come and join my free Facebook group, Widowed and Rising. And make sure you tune in to the next episode of the Widow podcast. Thank you so much for listening to the Widow podcast with me, Karen Sutton. If you would like to be part of a supportive community of people who understand your grief, come and join my free Facebook group, Widowed and Rising. And make sure you tune in to the next episode of the Widow podcast.